The year is 1700. Across Europe and Asia, architecture is in the midst of a slow and deliberate evolution, shaped by centuries of trial and error. The buildings rising across major cities like London, Paris, and Moscow speak to the developments of the time, strong, symmetrical, and built to withstand the test of time, but still bound by the technologies and methods of the era. From intricate Baroque facades to sturdy classical columns, the designs of the day adhere to the expectations of their builders. In most places, the growth of urban areas is still in its infancy, with most structures being built of stone or wood, relying on rudimentary engineering principles. And then, across the vast stretches of Siberia, Mongolia, and parts of Eastern Europe, a different kind of architecture is quietly rising. Its size is monumental, its materials seem far ahead of the time, and its design defies the practical limitations of the period. Buildings constructed with incredible precision, using techniques that would later be associated with industrial-age engineering. Where did these structures come from? How were they built in an era where technology barely allowed for basic stonework, let alone complex engineering feats? There's something odd, something out of place in the timeline of human history. The question arises, how could these buildings, attributed to a civilization long forgotten and often relegated to the fringes of historical record, appear so advanced for their time? Officially, the narrative goes something like this. Human civilizations have always followed a logical path toward improvement. Each society gradually perfected its engineering methods, building upon previous techniques and technologies. By the time the 1700s arrived, European cities were steadily advancing, mastering techniques in construction, but still bound by the limits of pre-industrial technology. Large stone structures, intricate domes, and architectural feats were the fruits of centuries of learning, with each age adding something new. This was a period of transition from the classical to the Baroque, a time when history seemed to flow forward, each generation building upon what the last had created. Yet, scattered across the regions of what we now call Tartaria, an area that includes parts of Russia, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe, the ruins of vast and sophisticated architectural projects stand as a testament to something different. These structures are far from primitive. They feature massive columns, domed roofs, intricate carvings, and construction materials that should have been beyond the capability of the societies of the time. One of the first and most glaring anomalies lies in the sheer scale of these buildings. Take, for example, the stonework found throughout Siberia. It is not only remarkably advanced in its design, but it also incorporates elements that we would not expect to find in architecture of that period, things like perfect acoustics, thermal regulation, and design that takes into account the surrounding geography in ways that were not typical for the 1700s. Buildings that can withstand the harsh Siberian winters while still maintaining an internal climate conducive to comfort, something that only much later building practices with modern materials and techniques could achieve. And yet, here it is, hundreds of years before the advent of modern insulation and energy efficiency techniques. Another perplexing detail is the architecture's resemblance to advanced engineering principles. The domed roofs, sweeping arches, and massive stone pillars are similar to what we might associate with later periods, particularly those of the 19th century, when industrialization brought about a new understanding of materials and load-bearing capacities. These principles were not widely understood in the 1700s, yet they are evident in the Tartarian buildings that remain. But the most troubling aspect of this mystery is the complete absence of historical records. In the well-documented cities of Europe and Asia, we can trace the development of architectural styles and techniques, layer by layer. However, in the case of Tartaria, the historical narrative is fragmented at best. There is little mention of an empire that could have constructed such intricate and massive buildings. The known history of the time simply doesn't account for these extraordinary feats of engineering. What's perhaps most intriguing is the fact that these architectural anomalies are not isolated to one region. From Mongolia to the far reaches of Eastern Europe, these strange, advanced buildings share a striking resemblance to one another. In many cases, the same architectural motifs, massive domes, columns, and intricate stonework, appear in disparate regions, suggesting that the civilizations responsible for them were more connected than previously thought. This consistency between regions, spread across vast distances, challenges the traditional view of isolated, independent civilizations. How could different cultures, without the benefit of modern transportation or communication, have built such similar structures? And why, after hundreds of years, have these remarkable feats of architecture been largely forgotten or ignored? The timing raises questions. Why did these advanced architectural styles appear in such an out-of-place period? Was there an unknown connection between these far-flung regions, one that allowed for the exchange of architectural knowledge, or was there something else at play? Some lost civilization or forgotten empire that left behind these extraordinary monuments. The story of Tartarian architecture doesn't fit neatly into the narrative of technological progress that we are so familiar with. The more we look at these buildings, the more we begin to realize that they don't belong in the timeline that we have come to accept. They suggest a civilization or people who possessed knowledge far beyond what was believed possible for their time. But if this civilization did exist, where did it go? What happened to their knowledge, their buildings, their legacy? This investigation is not just about finding answers to questions. It's about confronting the gaps in the historical record, the parts of history that have been either overlooked or deliberately erased. The remnants of these buildings suggest that history may not be as linear as we have been taught to believe. Perhaps there is more to the story of our past than what we have been told. As we dive deeper into this mystery, one thing becomes clear. Tartarian architecture is not an anomaly that can be easily explained away. It forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the past, and it compels us to question the narratives that have been handed down through the generations. The structures, the scale, the materials, everything about them suggests a history that is far more complex than we've been led to believe. We may never have all the answers, but the evidence is undeniable. The more we uncover about these buildings, the more we realize that they are a key to understanding a forgotten chapter of human history. A chapter that may hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of our past. As the search for answers about Tartaria's architecture deepens, a significant pattern begins to emerge, one that points to a more organized, systematic approach to construction than was previously understood. The more we examine these ancient structures across Siberia, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe, the clearer it becomes that the architectural techniques employed were not simply isolated efforts. There seems to be an underlying cohesion, as though a larger, far-reaching vision was driving the design and construction of these structures. This vision, however, doesn't fit neatly within the framework of any known empire, nor does it align with the conventional timeline of architectural progress. When we shift our focus to the United States and the United Kingdom, two regions that were central to the development of industrial infrastructure in the 18th and 19th centuries, a fascinating parallel begins to unfold. Take the Erie Canal in the U.S., or the extensive rail systems in the U.K., which were built in the early days of industrialization. These projects were undertaken before the true demand for them had fully materialized. They were massive undertakings designed with foresight, and they played a key role in the eventual economic and logistical systems that would support the growth of these nations. What's notable is that much like the advanced structures of Tartaria, these infrastructural projects were not simply reactive, they were proactive. They were built to anticipate future needs, expanding beyond the requirements of the present. This foresight, the deliberate construction of infrastructure before its immediate necessity, is one of the key elements linking Tartarian architecture with the monumental projects in the U.S. and U.K. The Erie Canal was a visionary project, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes and opening up vast swaths of territory for trade and settlement. The railway systems of the U.K. were similarly forward-thinking, anticipating the future demands of an industrial society that was rapidly changing. Both these systems were built before the mass population movement and industrial demand had fully materialized, much like the Tartarian buildings, which seem to have been constructed without an immediate purpose, designed for a future that was not yet clear. The fact that these two distinct regions, separated by vast oceans and centuries of history, exhibited this same pattern of foresight in their infrastructure projects is more than just coincidence. It suggests the possibility that there was a common thread, a shared understanding of architecture and planning that transcended both time and geography. Could the advanced architectural principles seen in Tartarian ruins be part of a larger, global design ethos? If so, what would this mean for the conventional understanding of architectural evolution? The similarities between the engineering feats of the UK and US during their industrial revolutions and the sprawling, advanced structures of Tartaria don't stop at the conceptual level. They extend to the very materials used in construction. Take, for example, the massive stone and brick buildings of the UK during the industrial era. The durability and scale of these buildings were made possible by the introduction of new, stronger materials that allowed for more complex and larger structures. Similarly, the Tartarian buildings exhibit qualities that suggest the use of materials designed to endure, stone that could withstand extreme weather conditions, as well as intricate masonry that required a higher level of skill than the typical methods of the time. Moreover, both the UK and US industrial projects employed a sense of administrative precision, systems of organization that required a highly developed bureaucracy to manage large-scale projects. The same organizational skills are evident in the construction of Tartarian architecture. From the massive, interconnected urban networks to the detailed planning of infrastructure, there's a remarkable similarity in the way both sets of projects were conceived and executed. This is not the work of disconnected, isolated cultures. It speaks to a higher level of coordination, one that might have been shared between cultures and across regions, at least conceptually. As we continue to investigate these connections, it becomes apparent that these advanced systems were not simply about buildings or infrastructure in isolation. They were part of a larger, more integrated approach to urban development. The Tartarian structures, much like the UK and US infrastructure projects, seem to have been designed not just for the present moment but for a future vision that went far beyond the immediate needs of the people who built them. This foresight in both the Western and Eastern hemispheres speaks to the possibility of an ancient, global approach to urbanism, a lost understanding of how to build systems that would endure and support future generations. The more we examine the systems themselves, the railways, canals, storage facilities, and grids, the more we see evidence of over-engineering. In both the Western and Eastern worlds, these systems were built with an almost obsessive attention to detail. They were designed to last, and they were created with an eye toward optimizing efficiency and sustainability in ways that were ahead of their time. The same can be said of the Tartarian structures. Massive domed buildings that were designed to withstand the test of time, intricate water systems that hinted at an advanced understanding of hydraulics, and urban layouts that seem to have been designed with functionality and longevity in mind. This over-engineering is perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of the Tartarian buildings. They were not built simply to meet the immediate needs of the people living in those areas. Instead, they were designed with a vision for the long term, a vision that anticipated future growth and demands. These were not buildings constructed in a reactive way, they were the result of proactive planning, much like the massive infrastructure projects of the UK and US. But as we delve deeper into this, we find ourselves faced with more questions. If these Tartarian structures were the result of such foresight, why did they fall into obscurity? Why is there so little documentation about the people who built them, and why is there such limited evidence of their culture? What happened to the knowledge that enabled them to build such remarkable structures? Were these civilizations wiped out, or did their knowledge simply fade over time, erased from the historical record? As we examine the evidence more closely, one thing becomes clear. This is not simply a case of lost architecture. It is the story of a forgotten vision, a blueprint for a civilization that may have understood how to build not just for the present but for the distant future. The question now becomes not just how these buildings were constructed, but who were the people who built them? What were their motivations and why does their legacy remain so elusive? This line of inquiry leads us to an uncomfortable conclusion. Could the same over-engineering that allowed these structures to endure for centuries be the very thing that led to their disappearance? Were these buildings and systems abandoned for reasons we cannot yet fully comprehend? The evidence grows ever more complex, compelling us to reconsider the true scope of Tartaria's legacy. As we shift our focus toward the final leg of our investigation, we are left with more than just questions about the past. We are left with a puzzle that is still being pieced together, one that speaks to the lost knowledge and forgotten vision of a civilization that may have understood architecture and infrastructure in ways that continue to elude us. As we approach the final stage of our investigation into Tartaria, we must delve into the very roots of the term itself, its historical origin and the evolving interpretations of what Tartaria truly represented. For centuries, Tartaria was used by Western explorers and cartographers to describe vast swaths of uncharted land in Asia, particularly Siberia and Central Asia. In maps from the 16th and 17th centuries, the name Tartary was applied to a large, undefined region of the East. It was a placeholder term, referring to an area known more for its mystery than for any concrete understanding of its civilizations. The people of Tartaria, according to these early explorers, were often described in vague, sometimes fantastical terms, creating an aura of myth and confusion that would persist for generations. The historical use of the term Tartaria was not tied to any specific empire or civilization. It was a vague reference to a land beyond the known world, an enigmatic region populated by people whose customs and ways of life were largely unknown to the West. The Russian Empire, during its early territorial expansions, encountered the remnants of cities and structures in these areas, but the records were sparse and often unreliable. While some accounts described advanced cities, others painted a picture of nomadic tribes and harsh environments. However, as the centuries passed and the focus shifted to the exploration of other continents, the story of Tartaria gradually faded from historical narratives. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that the concept of Tartaria began to be revisited. This time, not as a lost civilization but as a subject of intrigue and speculation. At this point, some began to question whether there was more to the Tartarian story than what the mainstream history books had told. Modern interpretations of Tartaria often focus on the idea of a lost or forgotten civilization, a great empire that once spanned much of Asia and Eastern Europe, leaving behind advanced architectural wonders, sophisticated infrastructure, and a culture far more developed than what was previously imagined. But the idea of Tartaria as an empire is not universally accepted. There are several competing interpretations, each offering a different perspective on the significance of this mysterious civilization. The first interpretation is the most familiar, the idea of a lost civilization that once thrived and then mysteriously disappeared. According to this theory, Tartaria was an advanced empire that built the monumental structures and infrastructure found across Siberia and Mongolia. Its people, it is claimed, possessed knowledge of architecture, energy systems, and urban planning far beyond anything that was believed to exist at the time. However, this civilization was allegedly wiped out, either by a natural disaster, a war, or even a deliberate effort by later civilizations to erase its memory. This interpretation posits that the Tartarians were far more sophisticated than the world gave them credit for, and their legacy was lost due to forces beyond their control. The second interpretation challenges the notion of a single, unified empire. Instead, it suggests that the term Tartaria refers to a collection of scattered, independent cultures that shared common architectural and infrastructural principles. These cultures, spread across vast regions, developed similar systems of design and engineering without necessarily being part of a cohesive political entity. In this view, the people of Tartaria were not a unified civilization, but rather a group of cultures that independently arrived at similar architectural solutions due to common challenges and environmental factors. This interpretation emphasizes the idea of convergence rather than a single empire, suggesting that the similarities between the structures found across Siberia, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe are the result of shared knowledge and cultural exchange rather than a lost civilization. The third interpretation, perhaps the most philosophical, suggests that Tartaria was not a civilization at all, but rather a metaphor for a lost age of human potential. In this view, the term Tartaria symbolizes a time in human history when people lived in greater harmony with nature and the world around them. The architectural wonders attributed to Tartaria are seen not as the remnants of a specific empire, but as representations of a higher understanding of architecture, energy, and urban design. The idea here is that the ancient knowledge of the Tartarians was not lost in the traditional sense, but has been forgotten or obscured by the march of industrialization and the development of modern society. Tartaria, in this view, is not a historical civilization but a symbol of what humanity could have achieved if it had stayed connected to the natural world and its true potential. These three interpretations, each offering a unique perspective, create a complex and often contradictory view of Tartaria. The first interpretation, with its vision of a lost civilization, paints a picture of an advanced society that was destroyed or forgotten, leaving behind only remnants of its former glory. The second interpretation, focusing on convergence and independent development, suggests that the similarities between the structures of Tartaria are the result of shared knowledge and ideas, rather than a unified empire. Finally, the third interpretation offers a more abstract understanding, viewing Tartaria as a symbol of lost human potential, representing an idealized time in history when humans lived in harmony with nature. These interpretations, while distinct, are not mutually exclusive. They each offer a different lens through which to view the evidence, and each interpretation invites reflection on what we believe about history, progress, and the nature of human civilization. They all share one common thread: the idea that Tartaria represents something more than just a footnote in history. Whether it was a lost empire, a collection of cultures, or a metaphor for human potential, Tartaria challenges our understanding of the past and invites us to reconsider the narrative of human progress. To understand the significance of Tartaria, we must also look to a pivotal moment in history, the year 1816. Known as the year without a summer, this year was marked by a global climate anomaly caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. The eruption led to a dramatic cooling of the Earth's climate, resulting in widespread crop failures and economic instability. For many, 1816 represented a turning point in history, a year that marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the old systems of knowledge and governance began to falter. The year's events would also set the stage for the rise of new ideas, many of which would later reshape the world in profound ways. Some theorists suggest that the catastrophic events of 1816 played a role in the collapse of Tartaria, or at least in the erasure of its legacy. Could it be that the climate disruptions, combined with the geopolitical upheavals of the time, led to the disappearance of the Tartarian civilization? The timing raises questions, as it is during this period that many of the grand architectural projects associated with Tartaria began to fall into disrepair or abandon. Yet, it's also possible that the collapse of Tartaria is not the result of a single event but rather the culmination of a series of factors: geopolitical shifts, technological stagnation, and the gradual erosion of knowledge. Whether the collapse was abrupt or gradual, one thing is clear: the legacy of Tartaria, its architectural feats, and its knowledge were lost to history in a way that continues to puzzle us today. The metaphor of Tartaria, however, transcends the historical facts. It represents something more: an ideal, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when it reaches beyond its current limitations. The evidence surrounding Tartaria invites us to examine not just the past, but also our present and future. What lessons can we learn from the forgotten knowledge of this mysterious civilization? What does it mean for us today as we grapple with the complexities of modern life, to reconnect with the ideals represented by Tartaria? As we conclude our investigation, we are left with a sense of reflective unease. The evidence, though intriguing, does not provide clear answers. It invites further examination, deeper inquiry, and a reconsideration of the narrative of human progress. Tartaria, whether real or symbolic, challenges our understanding of the past and reminds us that there are still many stories yet to be told. The mystery of Tartaria remains unsolved, but its legacy continues to spark curiosity and reflection, offering us a glimpse into what might have been, and what might still be possible if we dare to look beyond the boundaries of history as we know it.